No. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I recognize that we have an afternoon slot on probably the warmest, sunniest day in the year so far, so we'll try to keep this snappy and see you through to the coffee break. Glad to be here and invited to chair today's panel on sustainability in action, practical tips for a greener workplace. At the end, we have 5 minutes for questions, I believe, so please do submit any queries that you may have via Slido. But before I introduce our two panelists, a quick word to provide you information on what work CITMA has done on sustainability. CITMA is positioning itself as a climate leader within the intellectual property space through its twofold approach, a pledge and a growing knowledge hub. The pledge offers opportunity for firms and individuals to make a sustainability commitment. For firm signing means that they will say that they're engaging and making steps towards making a more sustainability and more ultimately net zero practice. For individuals, CITMA created a personal commitment option, so I would encourage everyone here today to think as whether they could sign this. To date, 15 firms and approximately 50 individuals have signed these pledges, demonstrating the profession's growing commitment to sustainability. CITMA also has a knowledge hub and pledge at its website. You can find it on Net Zero at CITMA. It provides practical resources, sharing best practices and supporting members wherever they might be on their sustainability journey. So the organization understands that firms and individuals are all at different stages and their resources are designed to help individuals at all different stages and practices. Through these initiatives, CITMA is helping ensure that the IP legal profession can be a beacon of sustainability. So, on to our panelists. So, we've got Maria Hall at Mewburn, Ellis, and Mathew Healey at Bates Wells. So, Maria, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Maria Hall, so I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Mewburn Ellis, and I'm responsible for driving business strategy at the firm, and I also look after the marketing and business development side of things. And I'm the ESG lead, so I'm responsible for everything to do with how we incorporate ESG into the firm.
Great. And Mathew?
So I'm Mathew Healey. I'm the head of the trademarks team at Bates Wells. They're a firm that a lot of you might not have heard of, but we're a full-service firm in central London with a small but perfectly formed trademark practice, 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and we have a long history of sort of trying to do the right things about green stuff, environment, sustainability.
Great, and I'll provide a little bit of background on myself. So I'm Alasdair Cameron. I lead on climate change policy at the Law Society of England and Wales. To provide a little bit of background as to what we've done at the Law Society of England and Wales, we published a climate change resolution in 2021 ahead of COP26, which outlined our expectations both for the profession and also a net zero commitment for the Law Society itself. The expectations for the profession are really ultimately twofold. One is that you need to think about your own practice from an operational perspective in terms of creating decarbonisation targets and ultimately potentially a net zero target. And this is ultimately driven by a lot of the time client demand, but also the recognition that across all of society, we need to see decarbonisation in order to meet the government's net zero target of 2050. The other aspect of it comes down to professional duties and lawyers' practice. So thinking about what your competency looks like and understanding how climate risk intersects in your own practice area. Following that, in 2023, we published our climate change guidance, which examined the whole of the profession and directly looked at solicitors' professional duties in the context of climate change, both from, as I said, an operational perspective and also from a lawyer's advice perspective. From an operational perspective, we looked at, for example, setting science-based targets. So that's making sure that your decarbonisation targets are in line with the aspirations set out by governments and corporations across the world. It also looks at the issue of greenwashing and what that means in regulation for solicitors under the SRA Code of Conduct, not to mislead the public or their clients with regards to any statements that they make. It also looked at the issue to do with advising clients and the intake of clients. If you've made sustainability commitments, what does that look like? If you've got a client who's a high polluter, how can you help them transition towards net zero through your advice? And then the second part looked at solicitors' duties, as I said. It looked at, we work with the SRA to look at the various duties that solicitors are under, their duty to warn, their duty to disclose risks, and their duty to maintain competency levels. And we provided guidance for all solicitors that understanding where climate risk intersects with your own practice area is a growing risk that your clients want you to understand and will need you to understand, and professional indemnity insurance is probably more likely to be looking at it in the future. So that is kind of where the Law Society is at, and sort of directing the profession towards net zero, considering climate change in a way that it wasn't 5-10 years ago. And we're seeing this across society, business taking this a lot more seriously. And I think this is well reflected by our two panelists today. So our first question I've got for Mathew, and it's, what was the biggest driver in getting your firm's sustainability strategy set? And what opportunities has your firm grasped as a result?
I think the biggest driver is in around 2015, we certified as something called a B Corp. I don't know if that's something that people are familiar with, but it's sort of a kind of an ethical business certification. We're in trademark world, right? So it's not a certification mark. It's a classic trademark governed by licenses, but it's like a certification mark, and it covers a big bit of it is environmental stuff. It's not just environment. It's things like, you know, how you treat your workforce. What's your differential between your highest paid employee and your lowest paid? And you have to score sort of 80 out of 200 to get your certification. And my firm was sort of instrumental in setting this up in the UK. It was originally a US thing, so we did all the contracts. I did some of the trademark work. And someone said, well, we've done all this work, why don't we try and register? And I remember sort of looking down the list of existing B Corps, and there was like a frozen meal manufacturer and someone who would come in and block your drains. And I was like, this is good, but it's not us. Actually, having lived this thing for a decade, I'm a total convert. It's not about who you are, it's about what you do. And what it's done is it's given us a framework, right? So we've got these standards that we need to set. Yeah, I will put it in these terms, these boxes we need to tick. And if we don't get them, we don't get our certification. So that's been a key driver for us moving forward. The other thing that we did as it was a couple of years after that, is Bates Wells declared a climate emergency and a biodiversity crisis. And I remember us doing this and thinking, well, that's a bit silly. You know, we're not the UN, we're not a government, we're a law firm, why are we doing this? But there were a couple of people, 2 or 3 people in our place who were hugely knowledgeable, hugely passionate about this kind of thing. And they were able to sort of articulate why this was actually a good thing for us to do, the difference we could make, the platform that we had to help others change, and to be completely frank with you guys, what it would do for us as a business. So that's the sort of beginning of the journey in a nutshell. And what we had at that point, we had a framework within which to operate. That was B Corp. We had skin in the game. So there was business benefit for us keeping going with all of this stuff, but equally reputational risk if we sort of chickened out and stopped doing it. And we had an engaged workforce. So that was the start of the journey. Then it gets quite boring. We set up a program group. It's still going. This is basically how we approach things. This is the granular detail. So it's quite flat. Anyone can join, be heard equally. It plugs directly into our management board, so it's not just a talking shop. It sort of has a direct line to the sort of big people upstairs. And underlying that is a real commitment from the firm to actually spend time and money doing that stuff. Did you ask me about benefits as well?
Well, drivers, I think, yeah.
Yeah, those are the drivers.
Yeah. And definitely in terms of the pledge fatigue, I think we've all experienced with climate change, and that there's a lot of say about how much is that translating into doing. And ultimately, you say setting up a work plan, an internal committee, that's a bit where the nuts and bolts stuff comes down to. And at the end of the day, I think what happened in 21, 22 with the kind of fervor with sustainability is a lot of corporations and businesses all swallowed a pill, and they're all kind of starting to realize, what does that actually mean? But ultimately, at the end of the day, it sounds as though becoming a B Corp, taking on this leadership position, you've certainly been able to put your firm in terms of advantaging itself, kind of carving out its own space within the market. So moving now on to Maria. So what are the biggest challenges your firm has faced in implementing its sustainability strategy? And how has it gotten so far on its sustainability strategy?
I think the biggest challenge for us was getting the business to take it seriously and understanding how we could make it relevant to us. The big kind of breakthrough for us came in the context of client demand, if I'm being really honest. We looked at it to begin with, it was something that we wanted to do, but we couldn't really necessarily determine real commercial value for why it was important for us to do it as a business. Why should we prioritize it? It wasn't until, frankly, we lost a pitch in front of quite a large client and it was new business, it wasn't an existing client, but where we weren't able to talk about the environmental side of things. And we were asked that question, and the partner involved wasn't able to fully articulate what our stance was as a business. And that's when we really started to take it seriously. It started to have a kind of an impact and something that became something that we wanted to discuss more openly. So we took a similar route in the sense that we set out a stance. We weren't really sure where to start. We'd already started to think about it a little bit, but it's quite a complicated area. So knowing where to start can be quite challenging, and knowing how to make it relevant for your business. So we started to look at what were the commitments that we wanted to make as a business, and how could we then take that and start to implement that and use that to help us create kind of commercial difference in the market and really be seen as a strong player in that space. We did lots of different things, kind of similar things in terms of setting up a sustainability group and having a champion that drives the conversation internally, and have also applied to a number of different certifications. I think they're a really valuable way of making sustainability something that's tangible within your organisation. So we're not a B Corp. I know that's quite hard to achieve, but what we did do was we submitted to EcoVadis, which is also a sustainability ratings agency, and it's a way of really understanding how effective your business is across a broad range of ratings, not just around the environmental and sustainability side, but also around I&D, around ethics, around culture, that side of things as well. And having that has been incredibly powerful to help our partners talk about it and make it feel real to our clients.
And how has it impacted your client retention and attracting new clients?
It's made a significant difference, and I think it's not necessarily something that we would have thought would really happen at the beginning. So we now track where work has come in, where our sustainability credentials are a considerable factor.
Yeah, and Mathew, for you as well, how has it impacted Bateswell's client retention and attraction?
Well, we've had the same experiences as you, and increasingly, we're going for pitches and tenders, and there's a question about sustainability, and if you can't answer it in the right way, you're immediately on the back foot.
Yeah.
But look, something that I feel, and this won't apply to everyone in the room, but I feel sometimes as a profession, we as attorneys don't perhaps do very much to differentiate each other. We don't pick on particular markets. I certainly know in my earlier career, I was a bit like, yeah, we'll do you a trademark, we'll do you anything. Look, this is possibly directly against my firm's commercial interest to say this, but if you have a specialism, clients recognise that, it helps you in work. And we win directly green work. We act for Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, who I know that you've done some work within your own. Submitted to it. So they're around the world, and we've just handled their rebrand. We do work for the Green Party. They haven't got a lot of trademarks, but there's plenty of work in other areas, and a number of environmental charities. So it's a big work winner for us, absolutely.
Yeah, and are either of you able to speak more about the challenges that you've maybe received? I mean, something that we come up against a lot with speaking to our member firms is that, I don't know if anybody else's firms here out there have already started gathering data relating to carbon emissions, particularly if they have knowledge around, particularly around scope 1 and 2, which ultimately is pretty straightforward. Scope 1 is your energy that you're burnt on site, and scope 2 is your imported, essentially. But scope 3 is all of your downstream and also your upstream emissions, which are a lot more complex to measure. Maria, what's been your experience in dealing with scope 3?
Yeah, it's quite hard. For us as IP businesses, I think scope 3 is predominantly our travel. That's where our biggest carbon emissions were for scope 3. And, clearly COVID actually helped us in that regard, right? Because we use video conferencing much more effectively than I think perhaps any of us could ever have imagined a few years ago. So for us, we've been working quite hard on reducing our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And like you say, that's all about buildings. But the travel piece is really important to us. And so we've now started to look at, we have what's called a sustainability sense check. So when a business trip or a conference is suggested, we look at, commercially, does it make sense? Does it stack up in terms of what we think we can achieve from it? But we also look at what is the carbon cost of that trip, and is it worth that? And we're very much encouraging our partners and our associates to travel economy where they can, which we know not everybody likes very much, but it's a way of reducing our emissions. We're also looking at how can we be more effective with the time that we are spending. So, let's not do multiple trips. Let's do less trips, but let's stay longer, and let's make more effective use of that time. And we're also looking at different modes of transportation. So, if you're going to Europe, let's take a train, let's do things differently. If you're traveling between offices, are there different ways of approaching it rather than perhaps driving? We've also implemented an electric car scheme as well, so we're very much encouraging our people to, if they do have to drive, to have electric vehicles. So it's a combination of things, I think, and there's a big education piece as well. We're looking at how our staff are commuting, understanding what the carbon output of that commute is, and trying to encourage them to do different things as well. So it's lots of small things.
Yeah, and no, certainly, even for us at the Law Society, I personally do not do the kind of carbon counting aspect of the work at the Law Society, but we've set a net zero strategy ourselves. We've got our scope 1 and 2 emissions all measured, and we've been, in fact, quite leading on that in terms of switching to renewable sources for our energy and everything, and that's quite easy. Well, it's easier to do in London, but your real challenge is your scope 3, and as you say, we are an organization which we rely a lot on doing international travel and attending international conferences to promote the legal sector abroad. And then how does that look like in terms of maintaining that business continuity, but at the same time, recognizing that at the end of the day, if it's a lot of it comes down to the kind of practical aspects of it. If you're signing off an international trip, you might have somebody who signs off the financial aspects of it, but when are they actually going to think about signing off the carbon aspect of it? When is that actually going to be captured in the process of the sign-off? Because often it's not. And then you get further down the line and realize, well, hold on a moment. In order for us to keep in line with our commitments and the glide path that we've set out to achieve net zero, we now need to cut back on what international travel we're doing. All our domestic travel, for example, in the UK, is done via rail or car. None of it is done by aviation. And I do know that firms are kind of taking a adapting approach towards dealing with this. I can't remember what firm it is directly off the top of my head, but a firm recently announced a travel plan where when their lawyers are traveling eastward, they don't fly business class on the basis that you won't need to have that extra rest. So all these, even if it's small changes that you're making to decrease your carbon footprint, there are little adapting steps that you can take, which will make an overall contributing effect. So I suppose the other question that I had was, so what practical actions specifically would you recommend that your firm takes on in order to make the most difference? Mathew, can I turn to you first?
I thought I'd forget some of these, so I got a list. Sorry, this is slightly crass.
It's not fair. I didn't know we could write stuff down.
What was interesting is What was interesting is when we talked about this before, because we've obviously had a chat before this, and a lot of what we'd done was like the same kinds of things.
Yeah.
But and I don't want to sort of take all the ideas.
Don't be silly.
We've both moved buildings, right?
Yeah.
And that sounds massive, but the reality for us was we were in this awful 1950s sort of crumbling block. Our lease was up anyway, and we were able to find a new landlord in a greener building who was more engaged with things like, more receptive for things like, can we have some solar panels? What about lighting? We've just spent, we're about to spend about 400 grand changing all our strip lighting for LEDs. That sounds like a bonkers amount, right? But it's like one of those things where you install solar panels. So after 6 or 7 or 8 years, you actually break even, and then you're in profit on the transaction. So it's win-win. Look, I've got a long list of things here that I could talk about. We don't go to look on the point of where you fly and what class you fly. Look, in my place, no one's paying that much attention to where the trademarks guys fly or don't fly to. So you measure it and you have a system, but really I think it's about personal responsibility. I've decided this year for these kinds of reasons not to go to Inter. One of my colleagues is going to Marks in The Hague, and I've got a sleeper train booked to Berlin, and I'm so looking forward to that. It's going to be absolutely lovely. One last thing that I'll say on this front, and this is me on my soapbox, and I was sort of told to say this, but I think it's really big. We've changed our default pension provider from a normal pension to an ethical pension. Now, investments can go down as well as up, but what I'm told is that those kinds of pensions, in very, very general terms, have done better than the other kind over the last decade or so. I'm also told that as an individual, the single biggest thing that you can do to help with climate change is to take your pension, which may well be a six-figure number, out of fossil fuels, out of automotive, whatever it is, and stick it in a green pension. It'll takes no time. It's really easy on mine. You log in and there's a drop-down menu. It's the easiest thing you can do. It may well save you money, and it really makes a difference.
Yeah, and definitely investments are one of those areas that, you know, from an institutional level, I know that some firms have taken the position of making it default, that, you know, that they opt out of more harmful from a carbon perspective type of businesses. And definitely on the front in terms of your building, I mean, the real challenge is if you're in a leased building, you have a lot less control as to what you can do in terms of making your building more sustainable, how you can change your lighting, how you can change, insulate the building, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the time we are actually starting to see, you can see law firms moving a lot now more recently, even though they've engaged in pretty long commercial leases to fulfill upon their sustainability commitments, not recognizing at the time that when they made them, that was going to have to require them to move. So this is having quite a lot of, significant impact upon, everybody who works in their office. Maria, what would you recommend?
In the context
in terms of a key practical steps that law firms can take in order to make a lot of difference in this space?
I think start thinking about it and start integrating it into your business strategy and start recognizing that it's important. For us, it was really important that we made sure that we looked through all the decisions we took as a business through an environmental lens. That doesn't mean sometimes we will change those decisions, but it means that we need to be really thinking about what the implications are of those choices. And to kind of build on from the comment about buildings, we increasingly see clients requesting that they understand what our longer term strategy is, that we have a net zero strategy in place. We now have steps over the next few years where we're looking at what our targets are from a net zero reduction perspective. And particularly with Scope 1 and Scope 2, unless you make some big decisions and longer term decisions, you're not going to be able to make those reductions. And we know from working with clients that they are now, as you mentioned earlier, you can't necessarily get through a pitch process if you don't have certain requirements. But for existing clients that see sustainability as being really important, it isn't enough to just make some commitments at the beginning. You have to show progress and development over a period of time. And so future-proofing your business and making sure that you're in a position that when those clients do come to you and say, well, that's fine, you've made X, Y, Z commitment, but where are you planning on being in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? And also, I think, being very aware if you're a partnership of your future partners and the potential legacy that you're leaving them, that you don't put them in a difficult position that they're, tied into something for X number of years that they can't change. When the world is going to keep moving and this is going to keep increasing in terms of priority and order of magnitude from a business strategy perspective. So I think stopping, thinking about it, recognizing the importance of it, even though it may feel quite abstract at the moment, it will get increasingly real. And I think factoring that into your business planning is key.
Definitely, and I mean across all sectors, particularly in the financial sector, in many ways the legal sector is behind in terms of professional services in England and Wales. The financial sector really did seize this by the horns in 2021, and we saw that in Glasgow COP26, where the finance community committed, in total trillions of dollars into decarbonisation globally. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about transition, and it's about business continuity, business resilience, and risk. Because at the end of the day, if a certain portion of your clients, let's say 25%, 30%, or indeed more, are in industries which are, heavy on fossil fuel consumption or heavy on fossil fuel creation, what's that going to mean in terms of your practice, in terms of your client base, in 20 years, in 25 years, et cetera, and further? if you think about it, this is going to have some real significant impacts for you in terms of continuity of your client income. So this is, I think, a real critical issue that all firms need to be looking at. Maria, coming back to you again in terms of kind of practical steps, are there any specific initiatives or anything that your firm has signed up to that you found to be particularly helpful in terms of getting a start on all of this?
I think the first point is there are a lot of them, and it's easy to get a little bit blindsided by the amount of different things that you can sign up to, so knowing where to start I think is quite important. I think for us, EcoVadis has been the most effective tool. It isn't the easiest by any stretch. It is hundreds and hundreds of questions, and you have to have a really good understanding of your business in order to submit to it, so it's not something that I think you can do immediately, but I think the whole concept of looking at what your clients are talking about, looking at what's out there in the market, so EcoVadis, CDP, there's the UN Global Compact, there's obviously CITMA's pledge as well. Starting with those kinds of things I think is really important, because if you look at the requirements of those types of ratings agencies, that helps give you a guide of the types of things that you need to be thinking about, and it almost gives you a checklist of actually, you know, these are the things we need to do, this is what we've done so far. And I think having that as a real kind of tangible thing is incredibly valuable. So we are platinum rated for EcoVadis, which means we're in the top 1% of all firms. We're the only IP firm in the world to have it. So for us, it's a real point of difference, and it gives my partners something really tangible to talk about with their clients. There's also a very large number of clients. There's 300,000 companies that have done the EcoVadis rating. And so actually, it's a great target list for us in terms of these are the clients that value this, that see it as important and want to work with firms that do this. So, you know, you talked about differentiation, and it isn't enough to just be a great trademark attorney. I wish it was, but it isn't. You've got to differentiate yourself. And so I think having those kinds of rankings is really, really useful, because it means everybody in your business can talk about it and own it. And I'd like to think there isn't a single person in Mewburn Ellis that doesn't know what EcoVadis is and that can't talk about it. And we certainly have examples where partners have been talking to clients and they've wanted to know about this side of our business, and they've been able to now, obviously they couldn't before, but now they've been able to talk really comprehensively about something that's, you know, an external rating and very valuable.
Yeah, no, completely. And I suppose, I guess for the audience here, if you know, you're working in trademark, you feel like this might be a separate world to you and everything. In terms of practical steps for things to look at, I would really direct you towards the Chancery Lane project. It develops contractual clauses which you can plug into existing contracts, which are aligned with net zero. So they have clauses there which go from light green, which are more light touch, to dark green, which are compliant with the Paris Agreement, essentially. And again, there's instructional kind of resources there as well to tell you about how to use them and discuss them with your client. So that's a good starting point in terms of thinking about mainstreaming it in your advice. The other one as well that I would strongly recommend you to look at is the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. This is the sister organization, essentially, in many ways, to the financial alliances which were set up during COP26 in Glasgow. And you very may well find out that your firm's already signed up to it, because a lot of the largest firms in the UK and multinational firms are signed up to it. And there you can find a ton of resources looking at a whole host of practice areas in terms of how climate change is impacting that area. And then the last area as well is if you look on Hughes Hall, which is part of Cambridge, and the Climate Law Atlas, they've got a section on trademark as well in terms of how climate change is impacting that around the world as well. So if you're looking at how specifically it's impacting your own practice area, what you might need to think about, I would definitely signpost you towards those resources. So now, hopefully we've got a couple questions, but yeah, no, thanks everyone for listening. So I see the top one. If you were to start your firm's sustainability journey tomorrow, what would be the first thing that you would do? Do either of you want to take that? Do you want
I can take that.
Maria?
Yeah. What's the first thing I would do? I would read lots and learn lots. When I first started this, I knew nothing about it really. I was an enthusiastic amateur. So the first thing I would do is find somebody who can be a champion and get them to learn about it, and just pick 2 or 3 things that you're going to do to begin with, because it's really hard to know where to start. So start with understanding your business, finding someone to kind of drive it as a champion. And I guess I'd probably
I would
look at your
agree
own
with that, and
carbon figures.
I think the instigator at my firm is there were a handful of lawyers, and actually the person who should be here today from Bates Wells is one of my paralegals, Georgia Brigden, and like this was like basically talking to you guys was the worst nightmare, so she sent me instead. But she's chaired the CITMA Net Zero working group that's led to the Net Zero pledge. There's a few other lawyers who were sort of one of the guys who's in the I forget what it's called.
David Hunter?
David Hunter.
Yeah.
He comes up with the contractual clauses that the green contract clauses.
Yeah.
You need a few people who love this stuff and are really committed to driving it forward. Without that energy, it becomes something that goes on a list and doesn't happen.
Yeah, and one thing I would also add to that, I hate to kind of say it, especially if you're a smaller firm, but you kind of have to hire somebody to do this. It is a full-time job that you need to get somebody engaged on it and push it forwards and make the business case for it at the partner level, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, before I joined the Law Society, there was nobody in my role specifically looking at climate change, and now it's kind of come on leaps and bounds in that space, and we're the leader in terms of bars internationally on climate change. So, yeah, would strongly recommend that. Second one, where to look at how people travel to work? Are you advising more working from home? Any themes from that you can share? Do either of you want to take that specifically?
Well, we do all the usual stuff around cycle to work schemes, but we promote it really well and we make it easy for people. Apparently, we've got the best showers in the city, I'm told. But one thing that we do, and this feels to me a little bit Soviet, but I'm sort of persuaded that it's a good thing. We do actually do an annual audit of people's commutes.
Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah, and I mean, it can feel a bit overbearing, but I like to think we do it in the right way. And no one's encouraged to not drive or not use whatever means of transport, but it sets people thinking. It puts it in people's minds, and people who have a right mind will think, could I be doing things differently? Yeah. The other thing that we do, we've signed up for something called Climate Perks. So this isn't quite commuting, but it's sort of related. So it's a scheme whereby when you go on holiday, if you travel by sustainable means, so if you get the boat or you get the train, you get the extra time that's taken back as leave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and lots of people sign up to it. I mean, the reality is it costs us money. But we get plenty back in other ways. It's worth it, absolutely.
Final question, Maria, I wonder if you're able to answer that one there. Do you actively vet your client sustainability creds before you accept mandates? Have you turned down any opportunities to work with particular clients on an ESG basis?
Oh, it's so hard, that question. We work on the basis that we don't judge what our clients do with their intellectual property. We help them protect their intellectual property. So it's a difficult one. And I think what we tend to do is we try to look at our clients in the round, and we look at if they are perhaps not as sustainable as we would like them to be. Are they working to improve that sustainability? Have they chosen to work with us because they actually want to work with a firm who can support them in that? Often we'll try to only work in areas, they may have multiple product lines. We'll try to work in areas that are the kind of the newer developing tech areas that are perhaps more sustainable, or where they're trying to kind of pivot their organization. We take it on a case-by-case basis. Yep. We have turned clients away where we felt concerned, but it's a real difficult one. And it's case by case, I think. And
similarly, on the flip side, I do know that a lot of law firms are getting client work refused because they're not in line with their client's expectation in terms of sustainability standards. So definitely is a work, and that's not just in terms of the client, the subject matter, the client matter, but also broadly in terms of the work that they're doing. So it is becoming a real kind of business case issue rather than just a nice to do. I think that's us at time now. So thanks everyone for keeping your attention this afternoon. Really appreciate having this session on sustainability to round out. Thanks very much.
Thank you.